Network Entertainment.
You're watching and listening to Now Steaming, where we dish out our hot takes as Tsinoy millennials. I'm Stan C, and with me as always are my co-hosts and my collaborators. They are the co-creators of So Asian Comics, Kimberly Mas and Cedric Cheng. Ced, welcome back.
Oh, yeah.
It's been a while since we've had you on the show.
I know. Because every time you guys had for the past recordings, right, I was down with sore throat. And then the other one is I had to man the So Asian Comics booth down at Lucky Chinatown, Binondo.
Yeah.
Your voice sounds better though. That's good to know.
Thank you. Hopefully that's the last.
Yes. So it's great that the crew is complete. This week on the show, we're going to be talking about a topic that we feel na dapat din pag-usapan because it was something that was very relevant to our generation of Tsinoys. And we've brought back with us a guest that we had on the previous season of the show. She's an educator and a cultural activist, someone who was very much involved in the grassroots while this issue of Kidnap for Ransom was happening, particularly sa Tsinoy community in the 90s. Please welcome back to the show, Miss Meah Angsi. Hi, Meah. Welcome back.
Hello. Good to be back. Not so good a topic.
Yeah, it's not so good a topic, but we felt na you were one of the best people to bring back as a resource person, especially because you were so heavily involved with trying to address this problem, which was so pervasive sa Tsinoy community that it actually became a stereotype, diba? Na, oh, Tsinoy, kidnap victim ka, or baka may kilala kang kidnap victim.
True.
Yeah, I think it's also something that we kind of dabbled into, right? In the previous episodes that we had you as a guest, na parang hindi siya naiwasan eh. It's people still talk about it. I think in our generation, it's still pretty much evident.
Yes, and even in the current generation, because you see it, you see kidnapping still happening in the news.
Yeah. So yung Kidnap for Ransom, no, it was so rampant back in the 90s to the point that if you watched Mano Po, the very first scene in the very first film of this entire film franchise was a kidnap scene where I believe it was Aramina's character who was kidnapped. Aramina or Chris Aquino, one of them, they were kidnapped. They were sisters. They were huddled together and then parang sinagip sila. And then cut to the next scene where it was like the big ama birthday party already, diba? So it was that big na yung association is rich Tsinoy family and kidnapping. And we can't really get into all of these discussions without laying down a few disclaimers. First off, this will effectively serve as a trigger warning na because some of our listeners may be actually involved.
Yes.
Baka mga families kayo who've actually gone through this or baka may kakilala kayo. So just a trigger warning that some of these topics will be very sensitive. Also another disclaimer na we're not going to discuss any ongoing cases because spoiler alert, may Kidnap for Ransom pa rin in the year of our Lord 2025. So we're not going to discuss names, cases, especially yung mga ongoing stuff na. The only things we are allowed to discuss, and please correct me if I'm wrong, are those that are actually in the news kasi that's easily Googleable.
Yes.
The published ones.
Okay.
Yes.
So, I guess to start, we have to address muna the stereotype kasi yun yung parang pinakaalam ng lahat eh. Bakit ba naging stereotype na, oh, Tsinoy, kidnap victim, or oh, Tsinoy, baka may experience ka or may kakilala kang nakidnap?
I guess it's I call it a loopy thing. It's like a chicken and egg issue type of thing. So, in the beginning, there wasn't a pattern. You got kidnapped, then they asked for ransom, you pay ransom, right? And then it became a pattern because the Tsinoys would traditionally pay ransom. No, this is before police involvement, before everything went into the news, right? They would pay ransom. Why would they pay ransom? Because they're scared of the authorities. You're looking at a historical background of a generation who were not Filipinos just 10 years before.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So that's the generation. So, Philippine history, 1975 mass naturalization law. It takes 6-7 years. So by mid-1980s, this is the time that you have maybe 90% of your Chinese in the Philippines becoming Philippine citizens. Before that, from World War II up to that point, they were foreign nationals in the country. Which means they have zero protection from anyone, right? Can they have protection from China? There was no embassy. China was closed. Do they have protection from the Philippine government? No, they're foreigners, right? So you have this foreign national minority who had to keep quiet. Don't make waves because you get deported. Where do they deport you?
Yeah.
Right? Where do you get deported? You have nowhere to go. So you have to be quiet, stay in your lane, don't make waves, just plod along, live your life. And then 10 years later, this is the same generation where 10, 15 years later, they are now more liquid, they now are financially more stable, and then they become victims of crime. But the tradition is to keep quiet.
Right.
Because, you carry that burden with you, right? So you keep quiet, you don't say anything, just make everything go away.
I'm curious, Meah, since you mentioned na the Chinese were targets because foreign nationals, parang parang man without a country,
Right.
for lack of a better term, di ba? But what about, let's say, yung mga other ethnicities who were here? Kasi hindi lang naman tayo yung mga may diaspora dito sa Pilipinas. Like Indians were also migrating to the Philippines, di ba? This is also before the wave of Koreans who immigrated. So ang pinaka naisip ko are the Indians. Why weren't they targets? Not that I wanted them to be targets.
Yeah.
To make that clear.
I guess everyone was targeted, but the minority that had the least protection were the Chinese because China was closed. So there was no embassy, there's no consulate, there's no ambassador to protect you. There's no foreign policy relations. There's no foreign relations with that country, the origin country, right? Until 1975 when we reestablished diplomatic relations with China, right? So that period from World War II up to 1975, zero protection for this group, right? So you carry that burden over, and then if you're a victim of crime, no choice. You just stay quiet, just figure out the best way, the fastest way to keep quiet and make the problem go away, which is to pay ransom. And so, of course, if you think of the criminal underworld,
We're very convenient targets because they also
Right.
don't want noise.
yeah.
Yeah.
Diba? The criminal underworld, thinks the news spreads fast. Huy, yun na lang kidnapin mo kasi babayad agad yan.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So, there you go. And then it just kept snowballing from there until now.
So, yung podcast natin, a lot of our listeners are actually mga ka-generation natin,
Yes.
the millennials, diba? So now we are in our mid-30s, yung iba nasa early 40s na. So for a lot of us, part ng backdrop natin as we were growing up, yung issue ng kidnapping because our parents were extra strict with yung mga kalaro natin, saan tayo lumalabas,
Sleepovers.
kung makakalabas ka man lang.
Exactly. Alam mo ngayon, naiisip ko lang din na parang these were something that I didn't even know before. I didn't know the gravity of the situation. Nakala ko lang parang, strict lang parents ko. Ganun lang. But there was actually a meaning behind all of this, and it was all because of that na hindi nila na-open up actually until I actually told them we're gonna be having this episode, and until when I was in college already.
So why was that a thing, Meah? Why the 90s? Why was it such a hot time for Kidnap for Ransom?
I'm not sure about the time period. I mean, the time period really happened in the 90s. I don't know why that time, right? I guess confluence of events, when it started and then it snowballed, plus political situation during that time. Fidel Ramos, as president at that time, he came out in the news that this was a parochial problem. This is a problem. This is a problem of the Chinese community.
So hands
Right.
off.
Yeah, so, this is a local police matter. So have your local police deal with it, things like that, right? And then after a while, I remember he appointed the vice president at that time, Joseph Estrada, to head the something anti-crime commission. Philippine Anti-Crime Commission, I think. I may have my names wrong, but and then so he started working with the police to try and solve the problem. But I'm not sure what's happening there, but the problem never really got solved. Right? So at the height of kidnapping, we have this in our records. This has been said a lot in the late 1990s. At the height of kidnapping, there were incidents once every other day. That's the average. When we say incident, it's not one person. Because sometimes one incident, for example, it's one car and you have 3 siblings or maybe siblings and cousins in a van. No, so you could have one incident with 4 or 5 victims.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe one incident with 1 victim. But we were averaging once every other day in the late 1990s.
During this time, that was like I was a child of the 90s, literally. But I was kind of watching the news, so medyo aware ako na kidnapping was a thing. And that's when I first heard the name Teresita Angsi. And of course, that's your mother. And every time I hear her name, I always think back to that time when kidnapping was such a hot thing because she was at the forefront of really speaking up for the community. So when President Ramos says na it's a parochial issue, what was her response and what led her to take a more active role in addressing the situation?
So even before she became popular, this is such a bad thing to become popular for, no?
Right?
Yeah.
But I mean, may positive change naman kahit I don't look at Teresita Angsi as kidnapper. I look at her as, anti-kidnapping.
Yes,
diba?
yes.
Yeah, but
Same
the
thing.
role should not exist in the first place.
Exactly.
Yes, but that was not in her control.
Correct. So before she even became publicized kasi, she was already like somehow assisting. Like sometimes moral support, ganyan. She became publicized. She became, forefront in the public eye. When ABS-CBN showed a clip of her confronting Joseph Estrada. So the thing is, the camera guy wasn't fast enough. So they only got the clip at the end where it was already Estrada who pointed at her and said, "Ikaw si Teresita Angsino." And then that clip played for like 24, 48 hours over and over and over again.
But what was the
on
context?
the radio? Because it was the wake of Charlene C. Charlene C was 15 years old. She was kidnapped. And while the police attempted to rescue her, there was a shootout. There was a shootout with the kidnappers and she was caught in the crossfire and she died. Okay. And then during the wake, the family closed the doors, no media allowed. But when ERAP arrived, everybody came in. And then Tessie went to Mr. Estrada and asked, "Sir, kailan ba matatapos to?" No, because he had committed that tatapusin daw yung kidnapping. So, kailan ba matatapos to? And then he did that. The thing is, my mother is what, 5'1", 5'2"? And ERAP is bigger and big,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, so you have this image, clip of a big guy doing that. Ikaw si Teresita Angsino. Right?
Like looking down at her and pointing a finger at her. Yes.
Right? And that's the only clip. That's why she became so known with her full name, right? Because before that, she was just Mrs. C. And then, so she became popular because of that clip. No, because the front part of the clip was not
Yeah.
was not shown. No, it wasn't even taken because it was that fast.
Yes.
Right.
So anyway, so she became popular then, and then they started organizing for the funeral protest march for Charlene. And then the tagline at that time was, "After Charlene, who's next?"
This was in
Not
1993.
knowing 1993, not knowing that it wasn't a hypothetical question.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
Because normally protest, diba, hypotheticals.
Yeah.
But this one became true.
Oh, yeah.
And there were so many others who came after. Right? And so during that funeral march, a group of supporters were formed. People who formed themselves as an ad hoc committee to support the funeral, to help organize the march, and then to help support the other victims before Charlene, ganyan. And then it just snowballed from there, where the group never disbanded.
I want to share a quick story about this as an aside because before we recorded, Meah, you mentioned that the Charlene C case was a landmark moment with regard to the kidnap for ransom thing. So again, this was in 1993. I was a 3-year-old and my dad felt very personally invested in the matter. I guess because he was, a young dad raising a very young family. And then nakikita niya na nangyayari to. And he was involved with a group of people na would communicate to each other via radios in their cars. So he was part of this group. I believe they called themselves RCAT or something like that. And then he got in touch with Ray Langit, the veteran broadcaster, and he was giving them updates about, okay, ito na yung nangyayari with the Charlene C. case from my contacts from the Tsinoy community. And my dad's name is Glenn C. He called as Glenn Reyes. Use the name Reyes para one, it would sound Filipino, like he was more detached. And two, kasi pag sinabi niyang Glenn C, they would think na, oh, kamag-anak mo si Charlene C. So may bias, may investment ka in the matter. And I remember my dad was kind of close to the situation during the protest march that you were mentioning, Meah, to the point that he was in contact with Aida Gonzalez, another veteran reporter, about the situation. And they were telling each other na, oh, yung ulo nandito sa area na to, yung dulo ng pila nandito sa area na to, because it was such a huge protest march. And I know you were there. So could you help us paint a picture, Meah, of how big that march was and why it was so transcendent for the community?
I was not there.
Oh, okay.
Because 1993, I was sick. In any case, so it was very big. Remember, I said historically, the Tsinoys are quiet.
Apolitical.
No, they're political. You know, when they became citizens, they would vote. They would exercise their citizenship rights and responsibilities. They're political.
Okay.
But they will not make waves. They're quiet, right? And then you have this funeral, everybody just went. Right? And this is the most noise you've had in 40 years, 50 years since after the war. Right? So it was a very, very big moment. It was a very landmark moment for the community because it was the first time, Christmas you're open.
Yeah.
The Tiamlay is open.
Yes.
New Year, you're open until lunch.
Always open.
December 31, right? December
Always
Mahal na araw,
31.
bukas din.
Holy Week, you're open. Charlene C., that day, January 1993, everything in Binondo was closed. That one day, it was closed. And that was a big thing. Because, the Chinese stores never close.
Yeah.
But this day, it was closed. Everybody went to the march. Right? Schools sent delegates. It was school buses. Entire schools came.
Ito, mga estudyante or mga teachers?
Students.
Wow.
Students and teachers in school buses, in official school buses, went to the march. Right? Because this was a thing. It was not isolated. This was a child. She was a child who was killed in a botched rescue attempt. And we finally had the guts to exercise our freedom to protest, to exercise our right to demand better from the government because we were not being served, right? We were victims of crime and people just wanted to sweep things under the rug, but this time we were not staying quiet, right? It was a very, very difficult day for everyone. And then the following years after that was even more difficult. This was just one. There were a couple more funeral marches after.
But none as big as Charlene's.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the numbers. But, after a while, parang funeral march na naman.
You get
Right.
desensitized.
It's so difficult, right? One death is a tragedy. 10 deaths is a
Statistic.
statistic.
Yeah.
I can't say it. But, that's eventually people, the media, moved on. Because you're just a statistic. It's no longer newsworthy because you're just one of 100, of 1,000. Right? And so, that was, I guess, a double tragedy to everything.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, let's go back to that viral, even though wala pang viral nun, no? That image of your mom and Erap. She asked, diba? So, kailan ba matatapos to? And clearly, as history tells us, it did not end. When did the government begin playing a more active role? Kasi sabi ni Ramos at the time, it's a parochial issue. When did that stance get turned on its head?
Well, even during President Ramos's time, he did appoint Vice President Estrada to be the head of the anti-crime task force or anti-crime commission, right? And then there was a counterpart in the Philippine National Police. So I don't know how that worked, but there were some inroads, there were some successes. But it was really during the time when Joseph Estrada became president that things started moving faster.
This was 98 na.
98 na, because I'm guessing that because there's now a budget for the police, plus there was now the anti-organized crime task force, which was purely dedicated to kidnapping, right? And so to support, to solve kidnapping cases, to support victims, so you have that organized task force, and they were also willing to work with the NGO. So this was formed during the Charlene C. funeral, the Movement for Restoration of Peace and Order. Yes, it says peace and order, but it's generally for kidnap victims. So these are people from all walks of life who decided that, okay, I would like to volunteer and help out. Like if there's a kidnap victim, I can go and provide moral support. Just stay there, buy their food, buy some food for them, help them talk to the police if they're scared of the police, so things like that, volunteers.
And this org, MRPO, it still exists today.
It still exists today. And after 30-something years, it's still not registered with the SEC. Precisely because the goal, I think this is the only group whose goal is to not exist. And that's why they kind of keep putting off, like, let's not, I guess it's a form of protest as well.
Not officialize it.
Because in the first place, they should not exist.
Yes.
Yung ganon.
Yes. But the fact that it's been around for 30 plus years.
I know, right? But, so parang, okay, the in 2003, they reorganized themselves, and a lot more, the membership, if you can call it that, are really the victims of kidnapping or the families of the victims, right? And then they support each other. We support each other attending court cases because you show your support in court. Make sure that the judge knows and the prosecutor and the defense lawyer knows that there is support for this case, that this case will not die, that you had to see this case all the way to the end, to the promulgation. Right? It takes more than 10 years from start to finish. 2 weeks ago, one of the cases got promulgated 14 years.
Yeah.
That's our average, 12, 13 years. That's our average. We've had cases 17 years. Right? And you show up. You show up because you want to support the family. You show up because you want the judge to know that we're watching you. In a lot of these cases, I'm sure the court records will show it, a lot of these cases, the judge can't hand down judgment. They'll pass it off. They'll pass it on to another judge, pass it on to another judge, raffle it off again, just for the promulgation, because they can't hand down judgment. I don't know their reasons, but you have a number of those. But eventually, you will get a judge who's strong-willed enough to hand down judgment.
And that's the goal.
That's the goal. That's the goal. Even if it takes 14, 15 years, that's the goal. You complete it. But it's so hard.
Yeah.
I can imagine, especially with the speed or lack thereof of the way things go around here.
All of the victims whose cases were successfully promulgated would tell you, sana nagbayad na lang ako ng ransom, mas mura, mas mabilis.
I want to get into yung impact of kidnapping back in the 90s kasi I can only speak for my own experience growing up sa Xavier and then yung being technically a San Juan Tsinoy where my parents were very bantay sarado growing up about where I was going, saan ako pupunta, sino kasama ko. I wasn't allowed to play sa street, diba? Yeah. Especially because yung neighborhood that we grew up in at the time, hindi pa siya ganun ka-gentrified.
Yes.
Hindi pa siya ganun kaganda. And then, yung sa Xavier, growing up, yung mga ID namin color-coded pa siya.
Oo.
So,
Agree.
kapag grade 5 and up ka, dapat green siya para makalabas ka on your own. Tapos pag red siya, kailangan may fetching pass or fetcher's card pa yung sundo mo. Sa Ika, ganun din, di ba,
Yeah.
Kim?
I was gonna share also na I think yung sa amin din, it started right after all of that. Like siguro sa 90s. After that, nagkaroon ng IDs. Kasi before, it was only like one ID. You can just go out with a fetcher, diba?
Ngayon color-coded na.
Ngayon, dalawa lang yung colors. Isang blue, isang orange.
Right.
Yung blue is you have to have a designated fetcher who has the same color of ID as you to bring you out.
Dapat nagmamatch siya. Tapos yung ID picture niya nandun din sa fetcher's card.
Ganun.
Yes.
Right.
Tapos yung isa, orange. You can just leave whenever you want because your parents already gave parang
Permission.
permission or consent to the school na she's free to go on her own. And we allowed it. Parang basically that was the thing. And it was super strict. I remember the guards would actually look at the IDs. Like, they look at it twice before parang ano. Tapos there was a time na ginawa na nilang swipe yung ID before you go out. If you don't swipe, you don't have records on the school and everything like that.
Wala kang time in, wala kang time out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tapos I would always stay late rin sa school because of extracurriculars.
Hi, I'm Joelle, and I'm back. Did you miss me? I wouldn't call this a season 2, but rather just another era with more lessons, realizations, and thoughts from all the overthinking. And it's not just gonna be me this time. We'll have special guests, other POVs, para mas marami pa tayong masagot na paano kungs ng buhay to hopefully help you find the answers you're looking for. Tara, this is Joelle's podcast, Paano Kung.
So this was the time you guys were probably elementary, preschool, elementary. I was in high school, no? And can you imagine? I was a teenager. My batch were all teenagers. We were second, third, fourth year, but we were all willing to agree with how strict with our parents were because it impacted us directly. We understood the gravity. We understood the dangers. It was during this time when all Tsinoy schools, if one kid is absent, they will immediately call the house. Right? Mr. C, your son is not in school. Is he at home? If Mr. C says yes, okay, we're good. Right? But suddenly, what if Mr. C says he went to school?
Patay.
Right? Because traditionally, during that time, children got abducted on the road on the way to school. Right? You get harangin ka, kidnapin ka, that evening or that lunch, may ransom demand ka na. Right? So, during that time, very strict. You're not present, your home will get called within the hour of school starting. So attendance first thing in the morning was very, very important. And everybody understood that. Nobody complained about it. For me, I walked home, so to prevent the harang, para hindi haharangin. So, before all of this happened, hinahatid ako ni mother to school. Right? After that, after a while, our lives got turned upside down. Doon na lang ako sa mga auntie ko, right? Si Igo, Ilaki. So they had an apartment near the school. I would walk back and forth lang, right? And then, but before I leave school, I have to page her. Do you remember?
Oh naman, yes.
We had beepers.
Yes, beepers.
Naabutan ko naman.
Naabutan ko yun, yeah.
I've sent messages on a beeper. So yes.
Same.
Okay. So I had to beep her before I left school, and we were allowed to use the school phone at that time because the office knows that a lot of us were calling our parents to tell our parents, okay, we're leaving school now. And then my mother knows that it takes me 10 minutes, 12 minutes to walk back to the apartment. Soon as I arrive in the apartment, I have to beep her again. I arrived home. Right? So this one lasts until I finish college. In college, I took public transport. I took the jeep home. It will take me 1 hour, 20 minutes, 1 hour, 30 minutes. Before I leave school, I have to go to a payphone and beep her. I'm leaving school now. When I get home, I have to beep her. I arrived home.
I think it's still very evident until today because my mom still does that. Where are you? Who are you with? And if you're safe, if you're with friends, if you got home, it's remnants of what
internalized
it's remnants
already.
of. Yeah, so this is like, I don't know, internalized trauma, I guess. And parents of my generation, we were teenagers when this was happening.
Yeah.
We bring that.
So
We
are you
bring
that
that-
batay sarado with your kids?
No.
Okay. But how did you bring it? Sige, how did you bring that with the way you rear your kids?
I see my friends, my generation, and how they react to this. On how strict they are with their kids. Exactly like your parents, where nasan ka, where are you going, how long are you going out, right?
Exact location.
Exact
Shout out to my
location.
dad.
Exact location. And then if you're moving locations, you have to tell me where you're
Yes.
going, right?
Yes.
Sometimes sometimes the issue of who you're with is not a thing. With my generation, but it's more of where are you. Okay, the who you're with is a question of, is that person a safe person to be with?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You know, if you're with some random dude, then maybe that's not so safe, right? It's always that safety, because for my generation, it literally was life and death.
Right. But did you think na yung kunwari the security measures that Savior Ika did, or how some families probably beefed up their security by getting, I don't know, security guards, bodyguards, armored cars or whatever. Did you think that that was an overreaction, or did you think it was commensurate to the threat level?
It was commensurate to the threat level, because it literally was life and death. You will do anything to safeguard your life. Because when you get at that time, if you get kidnapped, your family does not know if you're gonna come home alive or not. Diba? So that's the thing. You don't gamble with that. So you will do everything in your power to safeguard your family. If it means you can't go to prom, if it means you can't go out at all.
Yeah, the prom thing. I just, suddenly remembered something. My friend did not go to prom because her mother didn't allow it. And at that time, I was like, why didn't she allow it? Like, I didn't even question it anymore. I just found it like it was...
What did your friend feel? Was she like super galit or...
She was more of... she was
Resigned
sad.
to it.
She was sad. But since she was the only daughter, and then parang she really wanted to attend. And then since sabi ng mom niya, bawal, I will not sign your circular paper that you will go to the prom, she didn't go. So to just avoid conflict in general. So she felt sad. She felt like she missed out a huge part of high school,
Of
since
course.
everybody was like talking about prom. So yun, may mga effects na ganun. And I also thought of something just now when you were mentioning all these things, na even down to the security of the house, diba? Hindi ko alam if it's a personal experience of mine, but my dad would always be, since before we lived in a building, so parang my dad would make sure that all of the doors are locked. Like every single night, naaalala ko parang umaakyat siya sa like until the third floor to make sure that the windows, the doors are locked. And then parang naging ano na rin siya, even me, subconsciously I do that. Like parang linak mo ba yung door? Linak mo natin yung pinto?
We
Parang ganun.
carry
Yes.
that, no? Oo.
Yes.
So, when I was in college, when things were really, really bad, we left our house because our house is just an open house in the street, on the, regular street, and moved to a condo, so there's security guard. And then my mother deliberately got one of those stainless steel doors without a doorknob, where you need a key.
Yeah.
So, and then if you're inside, there's a deadbolt,
Yes.
and all that, right?
Yes.
So she got one of those doors, and it was so expensive. It was really pretty, but it was also a very, very expensive door. But she did that for our security, right? And then, so we moved to a condo for 3 years for security purposes, so that there's a guard.
Yeah.
And that the guard, all the guard agency, the condo people were informed that there are 0 visitors to this apartment. There's how many people here? This is the name of our helper. There are 0 visitors. There are 0 deliveries. No one is allowed up to... When they say, oh, we're going to apartment A. Nope, that's not true. Right? Because no one's going to go there. Okay? So, ganun yung security. You will do everything talaga to... Gagawin mo ang lahat para lang safe ka.
Yeah. Sed, let me ask you, since
Yeah, I was looking at
I
Sed
wanted to
too.
get like an outside perspective from like a non-Savior Ika person, no? In Makati Hope, since medyo mas hogya yung mga taga Makati Hope, did you guys feel the threat of kidnapping back in the 90s and early 2000s?
It was more of like, it was something that we all heard from the periphery, right? Sure, there were implementations like, like ID passes and all that. But it wasn't something that I would see people with bodyguards. And it was very foreign when there would be like that one student who would come to our batch that was wearing bodyguards. And for all of us, it was alien to us because we didn't, and we also felt intimidated because, bodyguard, and he might have guns or something. That kind of
Pero nothing kidnap related.
Nothing.
There's like a kidnap for ransom victim
Nothing
or whatever.
kidnap related. But however, like remembering all of these things that I guess our generation went through, parang it's justified when people would sometimes comment, Tsinoys, they're so sheltered. But it's justified kasi yung why we grew up sheltered. It was for our own protection from all of those things that was happening during our childhoods, right? And also, other than all of those things that you mentioned about bodyguards, bulletproof cars, I know enough that some families and businesses just moved away entirely, just like leave all of this behind.
Was it also the reason why parang there was a huge diaspora as well? Like I know of Chinese Filipinos na there's a huge community in Canada or maybe in the United States. Was it all because of this incident in the 90s?
Mostly, yes.
Was it a chain reaction or
Kind of.
That, and also during the 90s, we had the Asian financial crisis as well. So
Right.
Many
So
factors.
sabay-sabay. But people who were able to leave just left
yeah.
because it was safer that way. You don't want everybody recognized that living this kind of overly protective life was not normal. It was not good for our children. It was not good for our families. But this is what we live with because we're here. But if we could leave and change the equation for our families, why not? And so you have that. I think in the previous episode, I mentioned this, right? Capital flight. So what if said, your family just decided to leave? How many employees does your dad have? How many upline and downline industries rely on your company?
Yeah.
Right? So many incidences happened like that. Factory owners, manufacturers who just up and left. Then you have upline, downline industries dependent on them, plus employees and all of those other employees just out of a job.
Yes.
Just like that.
So the unemployment and then the loss of capital and income, right?
So were there really stats for this? I'm sure because
Meron.
maraming families
Capital flight. Capital flight in the mid-90s up to around 2000s. Meron namang data. So you have that.
What did it show? Like, I guess as an overview, what did it show and what were the direct implications sa government?
Di ko actually familiar in terms of did it affect GDP or things like that. Maybe not. Maybe it's not that big. No. But again, one incident is horrible. And then multiple incidences and then the government just says, ganyan talaga eh.
Right.
Right. Yun. So, it was hard. I mean, even if we debate the numbers, the people who got directly affected will tell you that the numbers are just numbers. And those do not equate to the lives that were ruined because of the kidnapping for ransom menace.
But at some point, like, since you mentioned na yung capital flight means other industries and companies are affected because of the upline and downline connection with yung family business na nag-up and leave, di ba? When did other people realize na hindi lang yung families yung directly impacted but even other people who relied on that family's business?
Eventually naman, lalo na because it coincided with the Asian financial crisis, nag-ano naman siya, the economists eventually put their ducks in a row and said, okay, these things are affecting each other, right? And so that's why it was during Era Estrada's time, 98 onwards, you get, there were a lot of cases that got solved because the kidnapping for ransom cases were now being addressed. Specifically with a task force dedicated to just kidnapping for ransom, right? And then so you have a dedicated task force. You have, I'm sure it had a budget. Diba, government kailangan may budget.
Yes.
Diba? So it had a budget and you had people who were not doing anything else except investigating kidnapping for ransom. That was important. Hindi ka nakikihalo and hindi ka nakikisawsaw with all the other crimes. Right? Meron kang dedicated police force just for these cases. And that helped a lot in solving a lot of the cases, or at least in arresting a lot of the suspects.
What did your mother think, or what did your generation think of yung stereotype na, Tsinoys kidnap victims? Like, going back to the Mano po example, na that was literally the first scene in the film.
Ang pangit, diba? Pero kasi at a certain point, totoo siya noon eh. Ngayon, hindi na. Because the numbers are down. But at some point, someone, ask my generation or your parents' generation said,
Yes.
they definitely know someone who was a victim. It's a first degree of separation. Right?
So it was that real na hindi
It
na
was
siya
that
parang,
real. Hindi siya, yung friend of a friend of a friend. Hindi, yung kapitbahay ng kaibigan ko. Hindi ganun eh. You know someone personally who was kidnapped.
No, and the trauma is real for that.
Yeah.
Tapos tight-knit community pa yung Tsinoy community.
Yeah,
so
so-
it's very much evident. I was actually checking. I wasn't sure kasi if the Mano po was created like 2000.
2000. Came out in
2000, right?
Yeah.
2000.
Yeah, so it tracks, diba, with siguro yung pa-wind down, and as it became something na mas normal na pag-usapan because it was a regular thing. But now that we've had like 3 decades, it feels weird to say, no? It's been 3 decades since the height of the kidnapping.
Yes.
As things stand now, where do you think the community sees it? Na kasi like, I think there's a generation younger than the millennials, kami, who treat it as like some far off distant thing. Whereas for us, diba, it was literally the backdrop under which we grew up.
Yes.
Because during our time when we were growing up, the stats were 1 every other day. When it went down, it was maybe 3-4 times a week. It was still a lot.
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying, the backdrop. Now, I think in the past few years, maybe 20 cases a year. So that's a far drop. And that's why younger generation, your Gen Z and lower, wala na. It's a foreign thing. They don't know about it. They only... And then, you also have this generation who don't really watch the news anymore. Diba? We just watch streaming services. We don't really watch the news.
Yeah.
Or maybe read news on Reddit and Twitter.
Yeah, TikTok University.
TikTok University na lang. Or
Twitter,
X.
yeah.
So, we're not, you know how, I don't know, you grew up, I'm sure, your parents at 6 o'clock in the evening turned on the news.
Yes. Yes. Abutan namin yun.
You have no choice but to watch the news with your parents.
Yes.
Parents now don't have to watch the news, and children don't have to watch the news with their parents anymore.
Right.
Because the generations now, we have more than one TV.
More than one device.
More than one device.
And different platforms because it's not just streaming, right?
Right,
You also
diba?
have articles na sometimes I see if it's not a clip of the news, it's actually a news article. But these are things na if it affects our family or parang it's relevant to us, dun lang i-share. Pero
That's
pag
why the
hindi
family
naman,
chat group in Viber is still there.
yes.
Diba? Like in my household, so it's me, my husband, and 2 kids. We don't have a TV. We haven't had a TV in 10 years. Because we don't watch TV. We haven't watched TV for so long. So I read the news in the morning. That's it. I have to physically log on and go get the news.
Right.
But none of my family members do that.
So now that we live in this type of reality where, as you said, like a rough estimate, 20 cases like a year as opposed to before, and at the height of it, once every other day, would you say na those protocols, safety measures, task force, that they've all been effective to some degree?
In a way, yes. Especially, plus, remember, late 90s up to mid 2000s, you have the task force, the police, really solving the cases and catching and arresting suspects. So, in the late 90s, early 2000s, the kidnap for ransom groups were really syndicates, criminal syndicates. You know, so they had names, the Waray-Waray group, mga ganon. No, so they had names. Sorry, that's the only one I remember.
Yeah. It also
remember.
comes to mind.
Yeah, rings
Yes.
a bell also.
So, they had names. The criminal syndicates had names. And so, if you break the Waray-Waray group, And then the remnants will join other groups, and then you break those two. You break those also, and then, everything breaks down. So without those criminal syndicates, there's no funding to perpetrate a crime. Because you still need funding. You need to carnap vehicles. You need to buy a carnap vehicle. You need to purchase illegal firearms. You have to find that somewhere, right? Yeah. So all of that, you need funding to perpetrate a crime.
Right.
No, so kidnapping for ransom is not a cheap crime to fulfill.
It's a criminal enterprise.
It is an enterprise. It was an enterprise. It really was big business at that time. So once the criminal syndicates got neutralized, that's the police word for it, neutralization, then if there are no more syndicates, you have less incidents.
Yeah.
You have less kidnapping incidents. So that's how also your rates go down, right?
As we begin to wind down here, I want to ask about yung long-term effect niya sa community. Kasi let's say you look at other ethnicities. For example, Jewish people, when you mention the Holocaust, it's still a very touchy subject, diba? Even though almost a century removed na. For our community, does it have that same nerve?
Not so much. Not so much kasi I think people of my generation, parents like me, my generation, we kind of protected our kids also. Mm-hmm. I guess we're more aware.
Of what?
Of how trauma can transfer, and so we try not to.
Mm-hmm. Do you proactively tell your kids na I was raised na bantay sarado because of this kidnapping thing? This doesn't exist as much of it's not as big of a threat today, kaya hindi kita gaganyanin. Is that a conversation you've had?
Well, this is very specific only for me. I cannot speak for my friends. I cannot speak for my relatives.
Sure.
But for me, because of what my mom did before, and I was, in that world, safety for my children is very, very crucial. And we talked about it. We talked about the realities, right? So they take the bus. So they take the bus to school. As in public bus, not school bus. Like bus sa kalsada.
Yeah.
And so our rule is no cell phone, no headphones, no music. You have to be fully aware. Ano ang kalaban mo sa bus? Kalaban mo is pickpocket, snatch, hold up, saksak. Diba? So you want to be fully aware. Oh, and kung mahihipuan ka.
Right.
Right? Because I have girls. So that's our conversation. Very specific. When you're in the bus, you're not allowed to take a nap. You're not allowed to sleep. You have to be fully aware of things around you, of where you're at. Okay? And then, in the same manner, they have to text us when they leave school so we can expect what time they arrive home. And then that's the time that I start getting paranoid if they're not yet home. Then I have to ask my husband, go look at X, go look at Instagram. Is there an accident on Commonwealth? Like, look it up. Go Waze live map and see if there's an accident. Bakit wala pa yung anak mo? Right? Because I'm paranoid like that. Yes, I'm neurotic like that. But then all parents are.
Yeah.
Right? Because safety of your children. So, I talk to my kids specifically about the dangers they will encounter in specific locations. Right? So, they're teenagers now. They've been asking to go out on their own to malls and all that. Before 15 years old, they were only allowed to go unsupervised to safer malls.
Okay.
Okay.
I know what you mean.
I know what you
coded,
mean. Yes.
but I get it.
I get it.
All right. After 15 years old, okay, kaya nyo na sarili ninyo. Bahala na kayo.
Yeah.
Gusto ko
Kaya
sabihin,
nyo na
pati
yan.
pala yung malls may blue and orange na
Oo
kulay.
naman.
Oo.
Yeah, so if they want to go, for example, when my younger one was like 13, sabi niya, Nay, gusto nang mag-Glorieta. Okay, Glorieta, you have escort. I'm going.
Okay.
Or you find a cool parent. Well, apparently I'm the cool parent now. Because the friends will agree that I'm the chaperone.
So
but I
Glorieta's
will
a safe
follow.
mall.
No, it's not. It's too big.
Kailangan yan.
It's
actually,
too big, too many
maraming
entrances and
areas,
exits.
yes.
So, if they wanted to go to Glorieta, they are required to have a parent follow them around.
Okay.
I will keep my distance, but I will follow you.
Right.
I think this was similar to our field trip also. I don't know if you had that, Stan or said.
Yeah.
We had a field trip, like one whole bus for class. Tapos we'd have like at least 3 or 4
Normal
volunteer. Normal naman yun.
Normal naman.
Okay.
Yung kanila, gimmick talaga eh. As in, lalabas sila.
Gimmick yun.
Hindi whole. Okay.
But
Gets.
if my kids would say like, okay, they're going to, let's say, SM Aura. Okay, they can go on their own. I will stay in a coffee shop and bahala na kayo. I'll stay in the coffee shop because you need a ride home.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I'll tambay there.
Yeah.
But I won't follow you around. But if you're in a bigger area with more entrances and exits, I will follow you.
Imagine how funny it would be if we made a video with like a Tsinoy parent and then we give them a list of malls, no? Tell me, safe or not safe?
Yung parang depends on the area you live in. Kasi if you're familiar with that area, if you're familiar with the mall or not.
But I'm sure there's generally a not safe mall versus a generally
naman.
safe mall.
General
I'm
consensus.
so tempted to say a particular
Dapat-
mall. Pero
No.
Pero wag.
We have
Dapat may
sponsors.
Instagram account yan eh. Di ba? Alam mo yung may bidet, walang bidet.
Yeah.
Parang ganon. So, safe, not safe.
safe ba dito? Okay.
Yeah.
Kim said, may questions pa ba kayo for Meah on the subject as, since we're about to wrap up here?
You've mentioned, right, now, when there were, I think before we were on air, you've mentioned that when there were still organized crime enterprise around, right, it was easier to track them down versus if we were talking about like random cases. Like, why is that?
Because criminal syndicates had I use the word template.
Yeah.
Criminal syndicates before had a template. They want your money, that's it.
Yes.
They don't want your life. They don't want to go to prison for murder. They don't want to get caught.
Yeah.
They want your money, period.
Yeah.
Right? So, in that sense, at that time, when we advise families, at that time, before, let's be very clear
Yeah.
that this was in the 1990s.
Okay.
Now, when we advise families for moral support, it's really to assure them that they want money. That's it. Okay? So you work with the police and let's see what can be done. The police can rescue your family member, things like that. We always work with the police. No, we always work with the police because, we're not vigilantes. We cannot catch criminals.
Yes.
It's still a police job.
Yeah.
So, but with when the criminal syndicates got disbanded and got neutralized, so now you have random people doing kidnapping, and you can no longer predict their behavior. You no longer know. Okay, was this person kidnapped for revenge? Was this person kidnapped only for money, or is there something more sinister?
Okay. So you don't
So,
know the motive anymore.
You don't know the motive anymore. If you know the motive,
Like it's easier to read the potential outcomes.
kind of, it's easier to not predict
Yeah,
the
to
potential
predict, yeah.
outcomes. Like, I'll give you money, you'll give me my person back.
Yes. Yeah.
But what if it's revenge and you don't know? What if it's a lover's quarrel that went wrong, right?
Yeah. So different outcomes for
Different
those. And it's hard
outcomes.
to
You
predict.
cannot predict anymore when you have different people in play and different motives in play. So that's more difficult. So now it's harder. No, because even if you say that there's like 20 or so lang per year, mahirap pa rin siya i-negotiate kasi
Right.
hindi mo na alam who you're dealing with.
I guess now it's a great time to tell our listeners where they can get in touch with organizations like the MRPO if ever they find themselves or someone that they care about in this very unfavorable situation na kidnap victim sila.
The Secretariat is still Kaisa para sa Kaunlaran, our organization. They're on Facebook. Their phone number is 8526-6796.
At least nagdagdag na nung first digit.
Yes.
O naman.
Yeah.
Yan. Again, 8526-6796. Whew, memorize ko pa rin after how many years. But yeah. So that's still the Secretariat number. You can still, I think they have an email. mrposecretariat@gmail.com. Yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
So there, we hope na, syempre, aside from the funny stuff and lighter stuff we get to talk about on the podcast, that it also helps shed light na the situation is still ongoing. There are still some ongoing cases, and we hope that it doesn't happen to you. But in the extremely unfortunate event that it does, maybe the MRPO is one of the resources that we can refer you to through the podcast. As we wrap up, Meah, is there a tip that you can share to our listeners to just keep themselves safe and to make sure that this type of generational trauma does not, get passed on?
There's a lot to keep yourself safe. One of the primary things is to always be aware of what's happening around you. Also, maybe one last thing, the Philippine National Police regularly can give seminars to your company, to your corporation on safety. So they do have those safety stuff, like how to avoid kidnapping. They even have now on cybersecurity. They have seminars like that on different aspects of security, and you can always call them up and have them give that for you for your companies.
And, just to probably wrap this up with the bow, the reason why we also wanted to talk about this is because it's not just an issue that affects Tsinoys exclusively. It affects all Filipinos, diba? Na just because we are Tsinoy, we are still Filipino, and other Filipinos who are not Tsinoy have also been affected clearly by, kunwari, yung capital flight na nangyari as a result of this. So the kidnapping, I guess what we want to say is that it's not an exclusively Tsinoy situation that we've had to
There
deal with.
have been Filipino victims
Right.
in the past. Less in number, pero meron.
Right. So that's
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
that's the point why we're talking about this.
And it's a part of Philippine history.
Oh naman. Recent history, diba? Tsinoy history, Filipino history, recent history.
Sakit.
We grew up with it, so we feel the back check just as much as you do. Meah, if people want to get in touch with you and ask questions, where can they find you?
I'm on Facebook, Meah Angsi. It's public, so go ahead and message me there.
All right. And as for us, if you want to hit us up, the show is online at Now Steaming Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. For me, for all of my work, you can find me at _Stancy. On Facebook, it's facebook.com/Stancy online.
It's at Kimberly Mass for me and So Asian Comics for both of us if you want to catch our online comics. And said,
You can follow me on Instagram. It's Cedric C. Cheng.
All right. And with that, this brings to an end this episode of Now Steaming. Medyo seryoso, but we hope that we were able to shed a bit of light and levity on this very, very heavy subject. And as we wrap up here, we'd like to remind everyone na hindi lahat ng Tsinoy
kidnap victim.
Thank you for listening to Now Steaming. Now Steaming is hosted by Stan C, Kimberly Mass, and Cedric Cheng. Ronel Cheng is our writer and researcher. Our show is produced, mixed, edited, and mastered by the Pod Network.
The opinions of podcast creators, hosts, and guests are not necessarily reflective of the official stance of the Pod Network Entertainment, its hosts, or other network programs. The content created by the people behind the podcast is personal and not meant to harm any religion, ethnicity, group, organization, company, or individual.